Hello. This is a little video about talking about the book cover for Greyhawk of Terrapin. And during the book launch, I found myself examining it, talking about the process and how things evolved, based on the cover. So, right off the bat, the first change is the train on the cover, and that wasn't originally in the manuscript. What had happened was the top 20 publishers declined, as they say, or rejected, as we say, and I was left with this golden opportunity to revisit, to examine, well, what is the connection that's missing? You know, why didn't they plug in? And that led me back to the classics, to fantasy novels, and just asking this question. Okay, well, what is it that gets us from here to there? And so originally it was set in the fantasy world, in the secondary world, and through this process of exploring, I came up with this train that was traveling back and forth between here, the real world, and this fantasy world in the imagination. And it also was an answer to some writers and readers who had commented on that. They were looking for some way. Also, too, that connected with working on the main character and her relationships, and just sort of how can we connect with this character. And so that was the quest, and I think it's pretty much there. Another metamorphosis, evolution, was the Green Lion, Inbril. And Inbril has been there, the Green Lion has been there from the beginning, from the very first manuscript. Changing a bit, but I had imagined him as having a unicorn's horn and wings. And this was taking from Carl Jung, and these stages of individuation, of healing the psyche. And I had put all these images, this symbolism together, sort of like as sort of one thing rather than a divided. And when the publisher showed me the cover, I was like, oh, you know, they've done a Green Lion, but there's no unicorn, there's no horn, there's no wings, and it was better. It was more cohesive. It was more simple. And two, going back to Carl Jung, it's the first step, is the Green Lion of this process. So then I went back to the manuscript and adjusted it for this change, because I preferred just the Green Lion. And there's some things that happen in the story, like the Green Lion flies, and originally it was with the wings, and this now, without the wings, brings it closer to, say, Aslan, or sort of further enchants. The wonderment factor goes up. You know, how can it fly? The moon, as well. The moon had always been there, and that has bridged over into the next book that I'm working on. But the whole process of development, rewriting, publishing, I can see now that it could go either way. It could say a publisher could go, "This is great, but you know, we don't want it on the moon," or can you show us something else? Maybe book 3 is the next book, that, you know, it's the better book, or maybe something completely different. And I was thinking about To Kill a Mockingbird, which is recently there was published a book. It was the first draft, and it was called, was it The Watchman? The Watchman Cometh, something like that. And I think it's Harper Lee. And her publisher said, "That's great, but we want some changes." And then she came back with To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's my thinking now. I still have the first draft, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, "Oh, this is good to rewrite." Now that we've developed it, and I know where we are in the relationships, and yeah, so fodder to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And then I think the last note is on the back, these two paragraphs in the middle. Originally, it was the synopsis that I submitted. And so these are the first two paragraphs of the synopsis. By the time that my publisher, Prodigy Gold, got it, it was really tight. I had gotten it into one page. I was focusing on the three storylines, the three areas of conflict, and what is it? The action, the physical conflict, the emotional conflict, and then the inner conflict, internal conflict. What classically they'll, or just say, I remember from school was it man versus nature, man versus man, and then man versus himself. And but that never really connected for me in this sort of more of a kind of a screenplay analogy. Yeah, so I'm focusing on those three areas, and it was just cool to see that they had taken it goes to just past the midpoint and then cuts off, and so it's creating this intrigue. And I felt, I was like, oh, that's fantastic. It communicates, and so it's sort of one thing that worked out. Let's see, anything else? Finally, the title. So Greyhawk of Terrapin, it didn't start off that way. Originally, it was The Secret of the Knots, because in the story there's these hieroglyphic symbols, and these symbols, these are called the knots. And as we were developing, my agent said, well, can we jazz it up? Is there any way to sort of energize this? Because it just didn't feel. And I agreed. And so we went with, I think it was Mool Scarm. Her last name was Scarm at that point. And The Secret of the Knots. I believe that's what it was. And so that's the title that it went out to the top 20 publishers. And that they declined. As I was waiting to hear back about this, I was developing other manuscripts and exploring. And one character came forward, and it was this fantasy. It was a teenager, a cowboy at the time, and it was just speaking to me. And the character's name was Greyhawk, and kind of like a Strider, Aragorn kind of character. A ranger who is living off in the wild, but there was more of a backstory. And so the idea, the name of the character crossed over and entered Mool's story, the book. And then finally the same thing with Terrapin. While I was writing and exploring, I found the name of the fantasy world. And that's coming from the Grateful Dead music group, their song Terrapin Station. All right. Thanks for watching. And that's a bit of backstory for the process of the publishing and the development of the book. And here we are on the other side of the fence.